Hey guys, Dan here. Today we're looking at the Moza R12 base with the KS steering wheel. And to spoiler you at the beginning here, one of these products is really very good and one is okay-ish. First of all, you know it, the usual disclaimer. Both products were provided for this review by Case King, that is one of the German distributors for Moza Racing. But obviously neither Case King nor Moza gets to see this video before it's posted, and all the opinions are my own. So we'll start with the price. The R12 base is 649 euros and the wheel is 309. Both prices are including taxes, and you can get the bundle for 949 with a whopping 9 euros of saving. We will start with the base. For that, I'll quickly remove the steering wheel with one of the best quick releases. We do have a very nice looking package. It's very compact. It has impressive build quality. The fit and finish is really good through the bank. I think it's made out of aluminum here, the black parts, the front. The casing on the rear is made out of plastic, but still very good build quality. Also the shaft, which is, by the way, not removable. You cannot put an extension on here. Looks very, very nice. And regarding mounting options, it is very limited. The only way to mount this base is here on the bottom. You have these 4 holes. Moza were clever enough to just copy the Fanatec mounting pattern. So if you do have a rig that allows mounting from the bottom, then the possibility is very high that it will have the Fanatec mounting pattern, so you can just mount this base to your rig. I could not mount this to my main rig. I put it on the test rig, but I still had to use one of their mounting adapters that attaches to the bottom and then lets you screw in the base from the top here. The peak torque of the base is 12 Newton meters. For me personally, that is a little bit too low since I'm used to the torque that a SimCube 2 Pro is putting out. But I would say for most people, 12 Newton meters is probably the sweet spot. We do have a brushless DC motor here with a 15-bit encoder, which definitely is on the lower side compared to the competition, but I still think the resolution is sufficient enough. But to be honest, the motor that they are using in this base does not feel very good. You can clearly feel the 16 steps the motor has. Like if you see me rotating the shaft, you can feel the windings of the motor pretty much. It does get a little bit better when we turn the device on, but it just doesn't feel as smooth as the competition. I've tried a lot of direct drives, but this definitely, in terms of feeling, in terms of smoothness, is one of the weaker bases. You do feel this cogging effect pretty much all the time, also when playing the game. But to be fair, when you are immersed in the game, when you focus on the racing action and everything, you will most likely ignore it and not really notice it directly anymore, but still it's there all the time, and for me it just didn't feel too good. The quick release being used here is the typical NRG style, which in my opinion is the best aftermarket QR. I just love this QR. It has pretty much no play in the connection. The attaching and removing of the wheel is very satisfying, and also the wheel side QR sides are relatively affordable. Let's actually show how to attach the wheel. Just put it on here. It locks into place and that's it. Very, very nice. I really, really do love this QR. SimMagic is using a similar one. I think Camus has a similar one. In my opinion, it's the best on the market. Also, when you do connect the wheel, you get this fancy startup animation, which looks pretty cool. And don't we just all love fancy RGB animations? On top of the base, you have 2 small mounting holes. This is to mount the Moza dashboard. You cannot use SimHub with the Moza dashboard, so I think the use is very limited. But they are there, and they are probably aftermarket dashboards that still use these mounting holes. Let's have a quick look at the rear. What we have here is the USB connection, we have the power connection, we have a little power button, and then several RJ type connectors to, for example, connect pedals or a shifter or the dashboard or stuff like that. I don't really have any other Moza accessories here right now, so I haven't tested it. Also, I like to just connect everything via USB. But considering that Moza is now starting to push console compatibility, that could be the reason for that, so that you can connect all your peripherals to the base and then the base to your console. But let's move on to the KS wheel. This is a 30 centimeter diameter Formula or GT style wheel, which is, in my opinion, the perfect size, 30 or 29.5 or something like that. Perfect sweet spot for me. It is made out of a fancy plastic, but it feels very good. It feels very sturdy. There's no noticeable flex while driving. And to be honest, if you don't touch it or like do this, I don't think you would really notice that it's made out of plastic compared to other wheels that are maybe made out of carbon fiber or aluminum. The wheel is pretty light and it weighs 1,227 grams, including the quick release, which is definitely nice when you pair it with a weaker base like the R12, because the heavier the wheel, the more force you need to actually feel all the details on the force feedback. On the front, we do have 10 RGB buttons with a very, very nice and satisfying click. Definitely among the better buttons that I've tried on any steering wheel. I don't know if I just haven't found it in the software, but I think you can just change the color on the wheel itself. To do so, you hold both shifters and then push the two joysticks to the inside. And then you see it went into the RGB color set mode. And now you can just click the button and it goes through several preset colors that you can choose. So let's, for example, set this to, I don't know, yellow, this to green. And then to save the color, you do the same thing, both shifters, joysticks to the inside. And then you have your RGB colors saved. We also do have a small LED shift light indicator on top. I find this always super useful on steering wheels. I don't know why there aren't more steering wheels with no display, but still the shift lights, because let's be honest, the display is kind of useless, but shift lights, I think, are very helpful. Good, then on the front, we also have two thumb rotaries. These are relatively easy to rotate, but you can still feel the clicks. And I think it's definitely better than nothing. Then we do have 3 encoders or rotary switches on the front. These definitely feel better. They have a more satisfying click and a little bit harder to turn. They don't have any push function, but you can configure them to either behave like an incremental encoder. So if I turn them into one direction, they will always send one button, and in the other, they will always send another button. Or you can set them up as rotary switches so that every position is its own button. Not a lot of sim racing games support rotary switches, but when they do, I think it can be very useful to, for example, have your traction control or ABS on the wheel, and it will always represent the position in the game. Then we also do have the 2 joysticks here. Those are not the typical 7-way funky switches that most people know, but it's still good. It's a more analog feeling joystick, even though I don't think it has analog output, and it also has a push function. The stuff that is missing compared to funky is you can't rotate the switch. Maybe you can once. On the back, we have 2 shifters. Those feel decent. I wish the resistance to press them was a little bit higher, but it's still not as weak as some other wheels that I've tested. They are way more expensive. They are magnetic shifters. They are relatively quiet, which is nice. The pedals are made out of, I don't know, some sort of metal. And to be honest, for a wheel at the price of 309 euros, the shifters feel very good. Same goes for the clutches. Also same material for the pedals. And you can either set these up as 2-axis or 1-axis with a dual clutch, or you can also set this to a button mode. No real complaints here. You do feel the cheap price here, but I would still say this feels great. And for example, something like the Cube Controls F Core definitely has weaker shifters. On the bottom, we also have an RJ connector. You can, in theory, connect this via cable to the Moza Universal Hub and then use the steering wheel on any base. But to be honest, I'm not sure if I would trust this connector to be used on a violent shaking direct drive, but I also haven't tested it. But yeah, I would not be insanely optimistic that this connector will last very long. Ergonomics of the wheel is very nice. Cannot really complain here. The rubber grips could be maybe a little bit softer, but it's still perfectly okay. They are relatively thin. If you like thicker grips, then don't look at this wheel. And one thing that I noticed while driving is that the wheel sometimes makes a weird resonating, oscillating sound. I don't know. You don't really hear it if you wear headphones, but sometimes it's there, maybe because of the plastic constructions, I don't know, but it's not that annoying and it doesn't happen too often. But I think we'll look at the Moza Pit House software next. Let's connect the wheel again. Oh, it's so satisfying. So in general, the software feels very modern and polished these days. I really like their software. I think it's among the best software that you can find in sim racing. Every feature that you can think of is pretty much there. The only thing I wish is, please, Moza, maybe add support for SimHub for all the LEDs and the shift lights. That would be insanely useful. You can configure everything in here. Well, I haven't found out how to configure the button colors, but you can still do that on the wheel. But I'll quickly run you through the options here. You have your overview where you can start the games and configure force feedback, for example. I didn't have to do it. It just worked out of the box in every game that I tried. But here you have a little overview of the current rotation of the wheel and the force feedback strength, but you also get all these options here in the tab for the wheelbase. So maximum steering angle, I always have it to 900 or 1080 typically. Just make sure that the game matches your setting here. Then road sensitivity, I personally always have on 10. I see no point in turning that down. And then the game force feedback intensity is set to 100. I pretty much run nearly default settings here. Also here, the settings to 100. Always disable the wheel spring, and the damping here is set to 10%. These are the basic settings, and then you can go into the more advanced settings. To be completely honest with you, I don't really know what the difference is between the maximum output torque limit and the game force feedback intensity. But in the end, both kind of affect the maximum torque the game can put out. I would always recommend to leave everything on 100%, especially on a weak base like the Moza R12. I think the risk that you really injure yourself with such a low force feedback is pretty low. And And if you turn down the force feedback in the software and not in the game, all you do is reduce your dynamic range. So for my settings, the steering wheel inertia is also set to the default position for the KS steering wheel here. Natural inertia also 100%. I did up the friction a little bit, which basically makes the wheel a little bit heavier when there's no force feedback currently going on. The speed-dependent damping can dampen the wheel when you drive quicker. I didn't like it, so I have this set to 0%. Then on the next tab, something very unique to Moza, you can basically think of it like an audio equalizer. On the left side, we have the bass frequencies, the low frequencies, like the body bumps or 80 kilometers per hour curb effects. And then on the right side, we have the higher frequency effects. For example, if you drive over curbs with a higher speed, or here it's called high frequency vibrations. It's a nice feature. I personally left it on 100%. I kind of want to experience the force feedback in a way that the game wants me to experience it. But you can absolutely go crazy here and, for example, increase the high frequency effects up to, what can you do, 500%. I probably wouldn't recommend to do that, but you can basically affect the amplitude of the force feedback depending on the frequency of the force feedback. Then what we have here, you probably know this from pedals. It's like a function that translates the strength of the force feedback the game gives you to the force feedback that the wheel gives you. I think it's probably more useful on very weak bases like the R3 or R5. I would recommend to leave this on linear, but what it's doing is pretty much, let's say the game says, hey, 20% force feedback. So let's just say this had 10 Newton meters. That would mean the game wants to give you 2 Newton meters of force feedback, but you want those forces to be higher. What you would do is like map these 20% in the game to, for example, 40 in the base. So the 2 Newton meters in the game would result in a 4 Newton meter force feedback on the base. I don't think it's terribly useful for stronger bases. I would still say the R12 is probably a base where you would set this to linear, but feel free to play with the settings and see if you find a setting that you prefer over the linear mode. Then miscellaneous, I never know how to pronounce this word, is just some random settings like the soft limiter, the stiffness, temperature control strategy if the base gets too hot, stuff like that. Then for the steering wheel, we also have some options. Like I said, you can set the dual clutch to either be 2-axis, what we see right now, or you can set them to what you typically would have in a dual clutch. So in this scenario, hold both, then you have 100% clutch, let one go, and then it goes to 41%, which is known as the bite point. You use this for standing starts, and then let go of the other clutch and it will drop to 0. Or you can have 2 axes, you can map them as buttons. You also always have this nice button tester on the left side to see exactly what it's doing. Then the band knob mode. So the band knob are these here. Button will mean that if you rotate it, you can see it pushes a different button depending on the position of the switch. So even if I push this really quickly, it will go through these 12 settings. And if I set this to knob, then it will switch to an incremental encoder mode. And if I turn this to the left, it will always send the same button. If I turn this to the right, it will always send the same button. One nice thing about rotary switches is if you turn them really quick, you can see that the base or the steering wheel will send all these impulses in a way that the game can still understand it. So if you go from 6 to 12 really, really quickly on a typical incremental encoder, it will skip steps. And with this, it will just keep sending the impulses until it has done enough impulses if you go, for example, 6 or 7 steps. Good, then the stick mode is for this. You can set this to button or D-pad. To be honest, I didn't notice any difference. And then the rest is to configure the RPMs. Unfortunately, you cannot configure it per car. I mean, you can create presets and then load these presets depending on which car you drive. But my personal opinion also is, don't try to perfectly match every car. Just set this to one setting that you can learn and then always rely on the RPMs and then go with that. But if you want full immersion, if you want to replicate it, you need to create different presets and manually load these. Like I said, Moza, please maybe add SimUp support. That will make life so much easier. But yeah. Another cool feature is there's the Pit House app. That is also available for your iPhone. I'm not sure if it's also on Android, but why would you want to use Android, right? You can go here and set all the settings using your phone. For example, if I want to go and set the bass, I click on enter the car. I don't know why. And then I have pretty much the same settings available here. So here I could set the steering angle. I could set road sensitivity, game force feedback. The advanced mode is here as well. So the maximum output torque limit and stuff. Even the equalizer is in here. And it can be very convenient if you are in the game, especially, for example, if you use the full screen mode, and sometimes when you alt tab out of full screen, everything breaks. You probably know the problem if you use that. Then having an app like this can come in really, really handy. You can have All the settings for the steering wheel as well could be useful. For example, standing starts, you want to play around with the clutch bite point and change it just on your phone. It sends it to the base, and yeah, I don't think this is a feature that is a must-have for every base, but I definitely think this is a nice-to-have thing. All right, let's come to the interesting part. How does it feel? And would I recommend it? I will not have any fancy B-roll here because I only was able to put this on my test rig because of the little limited mounting options. And the test rig is pretty ugly, so I didn't film anything there. But the bass feels pretty okay in the game. Moza did some improvements on force feedback. They always felt a little bit more damped compared to the competition, and this bass definitely feels more alive. I do think the force feedback is good enough to have a lot of fun in the game. It does have plenty of details, but it does not compare to the best in class, which in my opinion is still the Simracube. But it's significantly cheaper, and for the money you're paying, I would say this is a good bass. Unfortunately, what I dislike is you can feel this cogging effect in the bass all the time, especially if you're used to a smoother wheelbase, then it just becomes very apparent. If this will be your first direct drive, you might not even notice it. I'm sorry if you notice it now, but it reminds me a little bit of the Fanatec bases, the DD1, DD2. They also have this not very smooth feeling of the steering wheel. While I would say the bass is decent, it does have one big problem, and that is called the SimMagic Alpha Mini. On paper, this is only a 10 Newton meter bass, but from my subjective testing, it feels a bit stronger than the R12. I didn't scientifically measure it, but I was actually using the same steering wheel. You can, Moza and SimMagic both use the NRG style. You can put this on here. It works just fine. I couldn't use the shifters, but I still wanted to compare it with the same steering wheel. And the force feedback here, subjectively again, felt a little bit stronger than on the R12. And the price of the SimMagic base also is slightly below the R12. It's listed for $629. And honestly, I think it pretty much does everything better than the Moza. Maybe apart from the software. The new SimMagic software is much better than the old one, but it doesn't look as good as the Moza. I really like the sleek UI design of the Moza. The SimMagic looks a bit more cluttered, but I mean, how often do you actually use the software? But apart from that, I think it pretty much does everything a little bit or much better. The servo motor in this one here feels significantly smoother than what Moza is using. And that brings us to the question, would I recommend the R12 base? Let's put it like that. It really depends. If you're invested in the Moza ecosystem, or if you really, really love their wheel options, like the KS wheel, for example, then yeah, go for it. It's not a bad base. It's still a base that I would call very decent. But if you do not care about the Moza wheels, or if you do not have a lot of Moza stuff that you want to connect to here, then I'm having a hard time to recommend this over the SimMagic Alpha Mini, to be honest. Just go with the SimMagic then. The steering wheel is pretty much unrivaled at this price point. I can't really think of any other options that have this nice quality for this low price. It is only made out of plastic, but at no point while driving you really notice that. So yeah, that's my review of the Moza R12 and the KS steering wheel. Let me know what you think of the R12 in the comments down below. And if you liked the video, maybe give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to not miss any future videos. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Bye bye.